Welcome to episode 30 of Rail Talk. I am I'm Joe Bianca, ownership advisor at West Point Thoroughbreds. And John, it would appear that we've kicked up a little bit of a hornet's nest this week.
Yeah, one of the things that we said we were going to do, Joe, is to put things out there and have honest and straightforward conversations. And it came back tenfold, on the Twitter sphere and on the internet. So people are watching, people are listening, and I just hope that I can stay young like Peter Pan.
As I said in the open, we caused a bit of a stir with our conversation last week with Tinky, but we've never been ones to shy away on this show from controversy or hot button topics or straight up making some people really pissed off. So, undeterred, here we go. Part 2 with Tinky. So I am so pleased right now to welcome back to the program the man of the hour on horse racing Twitter for so many reasons, but also a very, very valued guest on this show. Tinky, welcome back to Rail Talk, man.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be back, and it hasn't been long, but I think we have some interesting things to talk about.
I would say so. A lot has happened in the 4 or so days between when we had you on and now today. Obviously, we're thrilled to have you back. It was pretty predictable, the response from a lot of the horse racing. Basically, I think everybody that got mad at you for coming on this show was all of the people you would least like to be cornered by at a party on horse racing Twitter. But listen, you have the right to respond. There have been a lot of attacks on you in the past couple of days, most of which came, attacking your anonymity in particular, and really not engaging with the substance of what you said and what we said on the show. So this is your chance, open floor here, to respond to some of the vitriol that's been thrown your way in the last few days.
Okay, thank you, Joe. I'm going to start by mentioning something that will be obvious to those who listen to the previous podcast that I was on, which is that my voice sounds a bit different this time around. And the reason for that is that when we were discussing originally how to filter my voice, the excellent engineer Anthony had essentially said to me that I had two options. I could go the Barry White route, or I could go the Alvin the Chipmunk route. And as any self-respecting gentleman of a certain number of years would likely choose, I opted for the Barry White. And surprisingly to everyone, it turned out to be a bit more like Andy Beyer than Barry White in terms of how the voice sounded. And that was not our intention. It was just an amusing coincidence, really. But
although, to be fair, when they sing, they both sound identical. Barry White and Andy
Beyer, the voice of an angel.
That's true. There should be a mashup. Someone should do a mashup of those two for sure. Anyhow, so we've made some changes. I asked him to push it a bit in the Alvin the Chipmunk direction, although I don't think it sounds like I've inhaled helium yet. So that's one little bit of housekeeping. The second is that I wanted to take the opportunity to give the listeners a little bit of background on the genesis of my screen name, Tinky, which has been something of a magnet recently for various slings and arrows. And unbeknownst to probably a lot of people, well, I would say probably a very high percentage of the people who have been exposed to me recently, my work on Twitter recently, it's a screen name that I have used for about 20 years now. And the genesis had nothing to do with a famous cartoon character, but in fact is the result of a relationship I had with a couple who happens to be in the industry. And they had a young child at the time, around 20 years ago. And the father called the young boy Tink, short for Tinky. And I sort of liked it. And this was around the time that I was just beginning to produce some writing on the internet and get involved in some of the early forums. I was involved in the dosage forum of Dr. Stephen Roman at the time, long time ago, and then Dan Illman's forum blog on Daily Racing Forum site. So I have been Tinky, so to speak, for a very long time. And that's a segue to the bigger point, which is that there has been an extraordinary amount of ad hominem attacks in the wake of our first broadcast. And because I've been doing this for 20 years, that sort of thing is nothing new to me. I mean, it might be new in terms of scale because I'm reaching more people now on Twitter than I did on the Discuss system that I was using with Dan Illman or with Ray Pollock, where I became fairly well known for a while. So yes, the numbers are much bigger, but the essence of those kind of attacks is always the same. And although I have repeated this a number of times, well, more than that, over the years, I'm going to do it once on this podcast, just in case there are some people out there who aren't aware of these facts. If someone launches an ad hominem attack, in other words, they're attacking the person rather than the substance of what they're saying or writing, it really is far more revealing about the person who launches the attack than the person who's receiving the attack. And what it almost invariably represents is an unwillingness or inability on the part of the attacker to deal with the substance of the post or what was said in the podcast or the response. And there's no good excuse for it. If these people disagree with things that I say, and they obviously do, then the classy way and the effective way to express their differences with my opinions and my views would be to attempt to rebut them, to explain why they disagree, why they think I'm wrong about something. And the fact that the vast majority of them never do that, all they do is complain about the fact that I'm anonymous and so on and so forth, that tells you really all you need to know. Now, one other point before we move on to much more interesting business, and that is that anonymity is really not a problem in the context of what I do. It's a problem in the minds of the people who launch these ad hominem attacks, but in the real world, it's not a problem, and I'll explain why. It's because unless I make a claim to some sort of special knowledge, then it really doesn't matter what my true identity is. What I mean by special knowledge is, look, if I were to say trainer X is a cheater, and I know this because I saw him injecting his horse with EPO one day. Well, obviously, under those kind of conditions, my true identity would be crucial to judging whether or not there's any veracity to the claim and whether I should be believed. But that's not what I do, with almost no exceptions, when I write and on Twitter and elsewhere, and when I am talking to you guys on this podcast. I'm giving fact-based opinions and making assertions, and it's all derived from publicly available information. Yes, I have long experience in the game as a professional, and that informs my opinions, but I'm not claiming special knowledge. And so there's really no basis on which to seriously argue that because I use a screen name, a nom de plume, as it was once called when people were writing for publications in the past, It's not a serious criticism. It wouldn't matter who I am. So I wanted to get that out of the way as well, and hopefully some people will get the message. And even though many others won't, at least those who do listen to these podcasts or read my writing online will understand why it is not a problem for me. They can throw the rocks whenever they want, but it really reflects poorly on them, and I'm not concerned about it at all.
Right. Absolutely. And Tink, if it makes you feel any better, people throw rocks at Joe because he doesn't own horses. People throw rocks at me because I've never trained a horse. I mean, it almost doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what, if they don't like the message, people are going to find a reason to attack you personally, whether it's, because you're behind a screen name or what have you. But one of the things that I just want to verify is that you're not currently incarcerated, nor are you a member of PETA.
That is true. Yeah, that's one of, I guess you could say, one of the benefits of the tweet storm or frenzy that appeared after Mike Rapoli decided to throw in his 2 cents, and that is that we got to see some real extremes. I mean, for many months or years, the speculation about my true identity has revolved mainly around, I'm Ray Pollock, or I am Barry Irwin of Team Valor. And of course, neither one of those are true. And anyone who's really paying attention would know that. It's easy to discern even without any protests on my part. But yes, more recently, it's been Jim Squires. No, I did not breed Monarchos. I wish I had bred Monarchos, but I did not. And now, yes, Jason Service, and we're getting some other pretty wild. Well, Andy Beyer, I understand that was our fault, but but yeah, hopefully we can get past all of this and focus on the people who are interested in what we actually have to say and who want to engage in serious discourse, rather than those who are either frightened by what we have to say or are poorly equipped to debate these matters.
Right. Okay, great. So let's kick off one of the topics that we wanted to discuss on a serious note, and that is a mare cap. And whether it's the 140 mares that the Jockey Club had originally implemented or tried to implement, or 200 mares, it almost doesn't matter what the number is. It's just whether or not you truly believe that a cap would, in essence, change the fragility of horses and make them sounder or make them better. Or are there other alternatives out there other than just, kind of artificially capping and changing the supply and demand system that we currently have? Please expound.
I'll first say that this is not a topic on which I have great expertise. Yes, I've been in the game a long time and involved in some respects with the breeding aspect of the game, and I've followed it with great interest. And some of what I write about the problems, especially the remarkable decline in durability that's occurred over the last 50 years of the average thoroughbred, is something that I'm very interested in. The mare cap itself and the genetic aspect of the related questions is not something that I have great expertise in. And incidentally, when I engaged early on with Mike Rapoli, who obviously does have a fair amount of experience as a breeder at this point, I asked him to explain, or have someone involved with his NTA organization to explain why a cap should be needed in order to strengthen the breed, approximately what number would be needed in order to effect the desired change, and how was that number going to be calculated. and so on. So I asked him a few questions. And then I also did a bit of research on my own because he did not respond to those questions that I asked. And so the first thing that I came across, which I think is salient and important, is that in January of 2020, there was an extensive study that was published. It was entitled Genomic Inbreeding Trends, Influential Sire Lines, and Selection in the Global Thoroughbred Horse Population. Now, of course, I don't want to make people run away from their computers thinking that I'm going to spend a half an hour digging into all the numbers that underpin a study like this. And in fact, I don't understand many of the numbers that are the foundation of a study like this.
You and me both.
It's a serious, yeah, both, yeah. It's a serious study. And what I would like to do, if you'll indulge me, is I'd like to just highlight a few of the points that are made by the authors of the study, because they at least begin to address some of the questions that I asked Mike Rapoli, and that I think anyone who has an interest in this issue would want to be, as well educated on as possible. So the first is that this is apparently the most comprehensive genetic analysis that's ever been performed on the thoroughbred racing population. They used a total of 10,118 thoroughbreds that were obviously genetically scanned and filed in the computer database. Now, this was not a study that was done only on American horses. In fact, it included horses from Europe, the Middle East, Australia, New Zealand, North America, of course, South Africa, and Japan. So it's a pretty wide selection of horses. But I think that makes it probably more robust and interesting than just focusing on one country. And one of the things they say at the beginning of the study, the authors, is, while I'm quoting, while inbreeding depression generally negatively impacts health and fertility through the accumulation of deleterious alleles, the, quote, tipping point at which there is an irreversible accumulation of unfavorable mutations is not currently known. I thought that was very interesting because it's suggesting that as the industry's breeding practices continue their trajectory in the direction of compression of genetic material, fewer and fewer outcrosses and greater appearances of a smaller number of stallions, it means that we don't really know at what point or the scientists don't really know, when it's going to be a really big problem. So that's number one. And now I'm going to jump all the way to the conclusion and make a few other highlight points. They say, we report here a highly significant increase in inbreeding in the global thoroughbred population during the last 5 decades, which is unlikely to be halted due to the current breeding practices. So once again, we're talking about, we're on a slippery slope and we don't know at what point, there could be a crash, so to speak. Then they go on to say that they suggest that the way to perhaps arrest this problematic trajectory and turn it around would be to do widespread genetic testing and identify the primary genetic sources that the sires and sire lines that are becoming increasingly compressed, and introduce outcrosses, try to reduce that by looking at the genetics, not just, it'd be very tempting for all of us to say, oh yeah, we know that there's a lot of Northern Dancer and Raise a Native and this and that, but they're talking about doing it in a scientific way, right? And at the end, they say, quote, given the limited diversity in current thoroughbred pedigrees, genomics-based measuring high-density genome-wide SNP information and a large reference population are likely to offer the best opportunity to slow and reverse the potential effects of inbreeding. So, there is, I would say, clear evidence based on this study that confirms what those of us who hadn't been thinking about it in such scientific terms have suspected, and that is that there's been a real compression of the pedigrees of the influences in the game, and that it is potentially a big problem. And I learned from that study that even the scientists don't know at what point exactly the real problems of inbreeding excessively begin to rear their ugly heads. So I'll start with that and kick it back to you guys.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to get your take on. I mean, the Jockey Club, the whole genesis of this discussion was the Jockey Club proposing the 140 mare cap, and then them getting, getting sued by 3 major stallion farms, and eventually being struck down. And I'm not a legal expert; I can't really say whether or not that was, infringing on the free market and the freedom of economics and the principles that have run the stallion business for a really long time in America. But just like, it's just one of those things where I think a lot of people say the right things in racing, that where the gene pool is getting restricted, horses are becoming less sound, horses aren't racing enough. And then when it comes down to the bottom line, there's really no oomph behind the words. And just, it was a predictable consequence of the Jockey Club trying to basically dictate how many mares every stallion could breed. But like, is there any way out of that? Is there any possible way that you think that the blue bloods and the bigwigs in this sport will agree, maybe not to 140 mare cap, but come together and agree that something needs to be drastically done and altered to fix this problem long term?
Yeah, unfortunately, Joe, I am on record for quite some time as being a skeptic of the likelihood of that happening, and I'm not going to spend any time delving into it in depth, but I'm going to again mention that there is a very close connection between how the business of the American thoroughbred racing industry has developed over the last 20 or 30 years in particular, and how business has been done, more broadly speaking, in the U.S. over the last 20 or 30 years. And I think that what we see are connections or analogies that are really fairly taught in some ways. And I think that for the same reason that the biggest and wealthiest companies in the U.S. have come to wield so much power, when you have an organization like Coolmore, they wield so much power for, Ireland, obviously, but even in the U.S. with, what was originally just an outpost in Ashford Stud, they now wield a tremendous amount of power. Now, I can go more deeply into this because the next set of points that I wanted to focus on is based on a fairly simple and straightforward bit of research that I did into all of the current American stallions that covered or were that covered 180 or more mares last year in 2023. Yes, the Jockey Club chose 140 as their cap. I'm not precisely sure why that was. I do believe that they had good reason to do it, not only based on the global study that I just excerpted a few quotes from, but because it's clear that there has been a tremendous compression of stallions that are dominating or coming to dominate the gene pool in the U.S. And I'll give a couple of related set of stats. So, and this is also what the Jockey Club said at the time that they attempted to impose the 140 mare cap. They pointed out that in 2010, there were 24 North American stallions that bred books in excess of 140 mares. And that was 24 out of a total of 3,865 stallions. 9 years later, there were 43, so almost a doubling of the number of stallions that were covering 140 or breeding 140 or more mares. And the population of stallions had been cut in half. Mm-hmm. So it was a huge jump. And there's the same sort of situation with mares. In 2007, there were 5,894 mares, which was 9.5% of all mares that were bred by stallions that covered 140 mares or more. By 2019, there were 7,415 mares, or 27%, almost a tripling of all mares bred were covered by stallions with books of more than 140. And those numbers, that was 2019. So, 5 years ago, those numbers are presumably worse today. So, the numbers were certainly there for the Jockey Club to be concerned. And I'm going to kick it back to you guys, but when you come back to me, though, I'm welcome to answer any questions. I do want to go over this list of 180 plus mare covered stallions, because there are some interesting breakdowns that I think you'll enjoy.
No, Tink, thank you. I appreciate you giving the audience some of that very important information. I as a breeder, I have some comments and that I want to have your feedback on. Number one, that my understanding was the 140 mare cap, the number came directly from a standard bred study that was done a couple of years prior, where they figured that 140 mares in their industry was the tipping point. So that's my understanding, is that's where the 140 cap came from. Other people have said to me, well, it's 140 because the idea was to really get the cap to 200 and they're negotiating. That could be it also. But be that as it may, when the mare cap originally was brought up, and there was a trial balloon from the Jockey Club, they didn't actually implement it for a good 8 or 9 months before they kind of sent up the warning flag originally. The idea was that they wanted to make it better for the other farms, meaning not Coolmore in essence, not Spendthrift in essence, to allow those farm stallions to be bred to a higher number of mares. My argument to that is, why 300 mares went to Golden Powell his first year? Because they priced them at $25,000, and 300 mare owners said, that's a good bargain. That's a good price. If they had them at $50,000, he probably wouldn't have gotten 300 mares to be bred to him. So, Coolmore, I think in particular, has done a very good job of analyzing the marketplace and price points for their stallions. That's one bone of contention that I have. The other is that, the powers that be, whether it's the Jockey Club or the industry in general, always look at the stick version. They want to penalize people for doing things. They want to penalize them for breeding a mare, too many mares to a stallion. They want to penalize you for not selling in the right sale, or having the horse, to the right train, whatever it is. It's always the stick. It's never the carrot. And I did an op-ed piece after the 140 mare rule was originally put out there, saying if if the general thought process behind implementing a mare cap is that we want to try to encourage the gene pool to expand, then instead of capping artificially, why don't we have bonuses established for outcrosses, or have restricted races like they do for Jersey breds, have restricted races where the science is there now. You can look to see if you bred your mare to a certain stallion and there's less than a 10% overlap in genetics in the first 7 generations, for example, that is considered a verified outcross, and therefore they could have segregated races accordingly. I don't believe just in the stick. I believe that there's 2 ways to incentivize people. I know that's a lot that we talked, that I just kind of threw out there, but any of that stick with you? Any of that have any interest either way on your viewpoints?
I think that your ideas are excellent and were very well articulated. I have been in the same boat, so to speak, for quite some time. It hasn't had an impact, but even when I had, I'm not going to say influence, but I had the ears of some people who were involved with some of the major racetracks in the U.S. I did suggest some of what you suggested, not as sophisticated as your last suggestion of having it based on genetics, which is a fascinating proposal, really, and I think one that should be considered. But yes, having restricted races as a form of incentive for people to move away from the flavors of the month stallions, and absolutely. And I think it's not coincidentally, it would be a very good way to also reinfuse some badly needed stamina into the American pedigrees. If there were good enough series of races developed for older horses, restricted to older horses, and at 10, 12 furlongs on the dirt, with perhaps increasing bonuses for winning them at multiple races or for 2 years consecutively, et cetera. There would be an impact. I don't know how big of an impact, but so I'm completely in agreement with you. Now, having said that, it's a perfect segue to where I said I wanted to go next, because there is at least one aspect of the mare cap, the stick as opposed to the carrot, that may be required in order to help the game in the longer run, to help the horses in the longer run. And I'll get to that in a minute. Is it okay if I delve into this now?
Please.
Yeah,
okay.
sure.
Okay. So the 180 was sort of arbitrary. Well, not entirely arbitrary. The one time, and yes, I am emphasizing it because it's really quite disappointing, as plenty of the listeners will know by now. The last 2 posts by Mike Rapoli on his account have been to attack me and to attack you and everyone involved with your podcast because of the guilt by association. And it's extremely disappointing that someone who purports to be serious and who spoke fairly eloquently when he introduced the NTA about how much this was going to be about inclusion and listening to other people's ideas and so on and so forth, that he would, join the peanut gallery of ad hominem launchers is really quite disappointing. But I'm going to mention now that there was one time A few weeks ago, when Mike and I had just begun to sort of spar a bit on Twitter, when he did engage me, and he engaged me on the mare cap issue. And again, no one expects Mike to be an expert in everything, but yes, he knows quite a bit about breeding at this point, and he certainly knows a lot of people who are important in the breeding industry. And so he initially said that 140 was too low. He didn't explain why, but he said that that 200 was something that he thought could be done, and he even parsed it out a bit and explained that, well, it could work. When I asked him how it could work, he said it could work because the mares that would have gone to the stallions that were above the cap would go to some that are below the cap. So the farms that stand those high cover stallions could balance it out. And I was very skeptical of that, but at least he made an effort to engage and to explain where he was coming from. Then a bit later, he changed the goalposts and said, well, somewhere between 170 and 200. So I'm not entirely clear on what he thinks would be the appropriate cap, what he thinks would be the realistic cap that could be implemented, and why he arrived at those decisions. I chose 180 because it just seemed to be a large enough sample size to draw some interesting inferences from and interesting information. So there are 26 stallions in last year that bred 180 or more mares. And not surprisingly, a fairly high percentage, in fact, 57% or 15 of the 26 stood at Ashford or stand at Ashford and Spendthrift. And of course, what this is confirming, as I say, no surprise, is that there's a reason why when the Jockey Club put the 140 mare cap into place and then rescinded it after a lawsuit was filed. The lawsuit was filed by Ashford, Spendthrift, and Three Chimneys. So 2 of those 3 farms represent 15 of the 26 stallions that cover the most mares in the country. And the obvious inference from that is that they are the ones who would stand to lose the most money if a hard cap were to be implemented. Now, where it gets more interesting from my standpoint is that I then took a look at the stallions in this total group of 26 and parsed them out by the subset that were bred without the mare owners having any idea of what to expect from the offspring of the sire in question. In other words, they were either sires that had not had a runner yet, or sires whose first crop was 2, which wouldn't have given enough information for people to be making decisions. They would have been booked long ago. Okay. Now, of these 26 stallions that bred 180 or more mares, 19 of them, 73%, had either no runners yet or just first crop 2-year-old runners the year that they were being bred, and last year when they were being bred. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is really problematic. It's a compounding of the other problems related to the compressing of the pool, because what you're doing here is creating a lot of foals without having any idea whether or not the typical characteristics that sire is passing on are positive or negative, and particularly with respect to durability.
Right.
Yep. Right. Yeah, and I think, listen, it's a short-sighted business, I think, sales and breeding. I mean, you just take a look at some of the stallions that have been exported because their foals did not reach the heights that they thought they would reach in the sales ring. And then all of a sudden they come back, the horses are on the track, and it's like, oh shit, wait a minute, these horses can actually run. Let's bring them all back.
Right.
So that's my problem is breeding to sell is just inherently, I think, pretty negative for the racing industry. Let's switch to the racetrack. Let's talk about the races for a little bit, because this is a conversation that John and I have had on this show before. The graded stakes calendar. There's 429 graded stakes in America in 2024. We have half the foal crop that we had 20 years ago. We have short fields. The average field size in America is just over 7, which is abysmal. How can we possibly justify having this many graded stakes? And then the second part to that question is, how can the Graded Stakes Committee possibly justify having zero races downgraded in Kentucky in 2024? To me, that's laughable. Tink, your thoughts?
Yes, well, this is an issue that I've had an interest in and published opinions on in the past, and I agree. I share your outrage. There's an irony to the front page. I believe it's the front page or the home page of TOBA, the Thoroughbred Owners and Breeders Association, which is that they quote a quote that I've used myself previously a couple of times. They quote the previous one-time editor of the Blood Horse, Kent Hollingsworth, who said, and I'm going to read it, "Why bother? Why try to remember which race is better than or inferior to another? Because to improve the breed, to upgrade a broodmare band, to select a stallion, to understand a catalog page, to evaluate a family, one must be able to recognize racing class." Now, Hollingsworth wrote that January 21st, 1972, a little over 50 years ago. And in 73, when the system that we are grappling with today was introduced, there were a total of 351 graded races, 63 of which were grade 1. In 2019, there were 445, 100 of which were grade 1. Mm-hmm. In 1973, there were 26,800 registered foals. In 2019, there were 20,400 foals. So a 26% increase in graded races, a 58% increase in grade 1 races, while the foal crop declined 23%. That really tells you all you need to know about who these decisions are benefiting. Are they really benefiting owners and breeders who would like information that can help them to make intelligent decisions? I mean, certainly not the way they once did. It's promiscuous, the number of graded races. And let me just go off on a tangent here, and then I'd like to hear more of the two of your thoughts. I have long been particularly outraged by the fact that 3-year-old Derby, so-called prep races, would be given grade 1 status. It is absolutely absurd. This year, coming up in a month or so, on March 30th, the Arkansas Derby and Florida Derby will both be run. And on April 6th, a week later, the Bluegrass will be run at Keeneland. All 3 of those are grade 1 races. And all 3 of them are run within a week of one another, 2 on one day. And this is literally, there's no hyperbole here. This is the opposite of what was originally intended by those who create, like Ken Hollingsworth, who created the pattern and graded race paradigm. They wanted the best horses to be funneled into the grade one races so that owners and breeders and fans and everyone else could actually see the best compete with the best. This is the opposite. This is a fracturing of the best 3-year-old male horses. And it's done intentionally because it is a huge catalyst for why there are so many horses that are retired early. They have the grade ones under their belt, and even if they fail in the Triple Crown races or get hurt on the road to it, they've got what they need to make their owners and the stud farms a lot of money. It's a huge problem.
And ironically enough, I say that, tongue in cheek, the members of the TOBA who are on the graded stakes committee are also breeders. Go figure. And Joe mentioned before that, that none of the races in their backyard were downgraded, which again is silly and ridiculous. And if it was any other industry, they would be laughable. Tink, you mentioned, that when horses, once they punch their ticket, my term, and they win a grade 2 or a grade 1, they're, automatically considered as a stallion prospect in Kentucky, almost regardless of what they do thereafter. And when you look at the top stallions that were freshman sires, first year sires in 2023, none of them ran more than 13 times in their career. Corniche ran 4, Cyberknife ran 13, Epicenter 11, Flightline 6, Jack Christopher 6, Life is Good 12, Olympiad 13, Early Voting, the Preakness winner 6, and Golden Pal 13. So it's twofold to me. It's one is, what do those horses all have in common? Well, that they're all grade 1 winners, or Triple Crown winners, and that's or Triple Crown race, winners. So that's one thing. The other is they don't want to ruin. They being the owners don't want to ruin the resume of these horses by running them at 4 and 5, where they could potentially stub their toe and not be worth as much. And quite frankly, they're worth more as a stallion prospect by the end of their 3-year-old year than they are at 4 and 5, which again is counterintuitive to us trying to breed sounder horses that can run more and run further into their careers. So it's really it's a convergence of all of these factors that are weakening in my opinion, the ability for these horses to stay sound.
Yes, those numbers are excellent, John, and and they do help to illuminate the problem. I agree with you completely. But we are now talking about an issue that it's extremely difficult to imagine how the problem might be resolved or the trajectory might be reversed, because as long as big money owners, and of course there are a lot of people and entities involved in this who have been profiting from it, consigners, agents, trainers, everyone, and I'm not singling anyone out. I'm saying everyone in the industry, is at least partly responsible. Everyone involved in that, in the breeding and selling part of the game, is at least partly responsible for how this situation has developed. As long as there's a market for it, as long as owners do not, or buyers, I should say, do not emphasize the need for a stallion to have proven that he was a sound racehorse, then why should they? It's much easier, in the same way that, and I'm not trying to disparage any whole aspect or of the game, but think about 2-year-old consigners. There are a lot of reasons that an argument could be made that the breeze up sales, the 2-year-old and training sales, are not helpful in terms of breeding better horses, because they are getting young horses to run as fast as they can over a very short distance, and people pay a lot of money for them. And it's the same situation. If people want to pay a lot of money for those horses, it's not so easy to blame the sellers. What do they're
right. Yeah, yep. You got to give the public what they want. If that's what they want, then it's going to be encouraged to continue to breed and develop those type of horses. I actually had somebody. We have Hades, who's on the Kentucky Derby campaign, and I actually had somebody reach out to me and say, it's great that you have a horse on the campaign, but you know that a lot of people are going to be against you. And I said, yeah, I know. It's my association with Joe, Bianca. That's why, obviously. But because we have a gelding that is on the campaign, nobody can benefit from that other than, the people who bred the horse and have siblings and the mother, the dam. For the most part, the general, industry is not going to benefit if Hades wins the Kentucky Derby. And I never thought of it in quite so terms, that there's an industry within the industry that is rooting for and against certain bloodlines to make it through to the next level, primarily, based on the fact of whether or not they can reproduce. And shame on me for being that naive, but I just never thought of it that way.
Well, John, it's sorry, go ahead, Tig.
No, go on, Joe.
Well,
Sorry.
I was just going to say it's gotten to the point where, racing is almost an afterthought. Racing is beside the point. Mm-hmm. Racing is a necessary evil in order to have enough top performances to get a horse to the stallion shed. I think about it like this. A lot of people complain about the one and done in college basketball.
Great example.
Guys come and they are, highly touted freshmen at Kentucky or Duke or whatever, and they have a great freshman season and they're off to the NBA. And you don't really get to build the programs and the rivalries the way that it used to be in the 70s and 80s. There's a parallel to that in racing, except it's as if it would be more like one and done. The guys go to Kentucky for a year and then they retire. Right. And then they're done. And you never see them play basketball again. That would be the more apt analogy. So
wasn't that Sean Kemp?
Sean Kemp might have had as many babies as Inner Mischief, actually. But that's the thing. And it's like, there's really no remedy to it unless you had some kind of unifying body or some kind of regulator come in and say, listen, you don't get to have a stallion unless they run a certain amount of times, unless they won a certain amount of races. Like, that's obviously never going to happen, but that's the only kind of way that you're going to actually be able to address this problem. The other potential remedy that people say is throw more money at the races, make the purses bigger. I don't think you can make the purses big enough to compete with the stallion shed. It's just not realistic. And one of those races that's gotten a huge purse, infusion in the last handful of years is the Saudi Cup. And we had that on Saturday. It was I love the winner. I love Senior Buscador. I'm a big fan of his, big fan of the connections who do things the right way, I think. But that race combined with the Dubai World Cup, Tink, I think has done so much to kind of destroy the American handicap race calendar. Like, we've gotten to the point now where basically half of the American graded stake handicap races, graded stakes races, the ones that used to have real prestige, like the Stephen Foster and the Met Mile, which still has a little bit of clout, they're irrelevant. They're irrelevant now because who wants to go run in the Saudi Cup, run in the Dubai World Cup, and come back and run another month or two in America? The Big Cap. The Big Cap used to be one of the biggest races, most important races in American history. And now it's a complete afterthought. Could you tell me when the Big Cap is? I couldn't tell you what weekend it is. I mean, just what are your thoughts overall about the Saudi Cup and just the way it's altered the landscape of American handicap racing?
Very good points. Very good points, Joe. It is I don't want to call it a logical conclusion, but, given what happened in Dubai and how that did begin to change how people with top horses in the U.S. thought about their campaigns and what they were going to do with their best horses at certain times of the year. For the Saudis to throw that amount of money at it, it's disappointing to me, because there was a time, I think back wistfully, when there was some reasonable correlation between the size of purses and the quality of fields that one could expect. And, that was, I admit, on paper, a very interesting race. The Japanese are making waves internationally. And even if they didn't run so well in that race, it was a very interesting race to handicap. And I share your pleasure that you derived from the winner. And I know we're not alone. A lot of people were happy to see it. For the connections and smaller connections, it gets to be very boring to see the usual suspects up there. But look, I mean, really, 20 million. I mean, would they not have shown up for 10 million? I mean, right.
Right.
And I'd like to. This is a tangent. We don't need to go off on it for more than a few seconds. But I remember a long time ago when there was the Blood Horse publishing, as they still do, along with many other types of statistics, the standings of stallions based on progeny earnings. And it was, one of my early light bulb moments as I was starting to get interested in breeding back in the late 1970s, early 1980s. I became interested in it, and I wanted to soak up what I could. And, I was looking at these lists, and one day, I wish I had saved it. I'll go on to eBay and find the appropriate blood horse, but appropriate dated vintage blood horse. But one day I was looking at the list, and I don't remember if he was first or second, but right up there with Danzig and Northern Dancer and maybe Mr. Prospect. I mean, this was this was a big time breeding. I mean, there were tremendous influences at stud those days. If not on top, maybe second in the standings was old Bob Bowers. Now, a lot of people are not going to recognize the name old Bob Bowers because without one horse,
right?
no one would ever have remembered him. He was, I think he stood in Michigan. Anyhow, he was the sire of John Henry, who was a great racehorse and a pleasure to watch. I saw him, race in the Arlington Million several times and so on. So that was an illustration to me of how distorted that sort of list could become. So, of course, the reason I mention it now is because Mineshaft, the sire of the winner of the Saudi Cup, is suddenly going to be on that list. Not just the obvious leading sire right now, but even at the end of the year, he may be second to Into Mischief or whatever. He'll be right up there because of one race. So that's it. It's just one illustration of how that kind of money does, distort our understanding of what's happening in the game.
Well, I mean, this has been an incredibly illuminating discussion as it was last time. This has been even better. And, I think like what Tink said at the outset was that, if you actually listen to the episode and listen to the things we're talking about, it's very, very hard to be mad at us and what we're doing, because we're just debating these issues in a very thoughtful way, especially on Tink's side. And if you're hyper focused on him being anonymous, you're really missing the forest for the trees. Just wanted to put that out there. Tink, it's been great having you, brother. We hope to have you back real soon. And sure yourself as always. And that's why you fit on this show. Thanks for the time, my man.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it thoroughly and look forward to speaking with you again sometime soon.
Let's do it.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
So that was an excellent conversation with Tinky. I think even better than the first one, because we're starting to get to know each other a little bit, starting to bounce ideas off each other better. And it's only going to get better from here. We'll have him back on, in a variety of capacities, probably do another full show with him, might have him on here or there just to pop up and talk about certain topics, because he is a valuable voice. And honestly, like I said, if you're focused on him being anonymous, you're focused on the wrong things. And like he said, it's not as if he's spilling state secrets or making accusations or slandering people. Like if that were the case, then yeah, he should put his face and his name behind it. But he's not. He's just a guy who has a lot of really smart, really nuanced, really reasoned ideas about the industry. And that's what we want. And anybody who's criticizing him, we'd love to have you on the show as well to debate him or debate us or just to give us your opinion and your side of things as well, because that's what, we're not married to any one opinion or any one, paradigm or just any one way of looking at the industry and its issues. We want to foster conversation, and every single voice is valuable. And if you don't believe that, then it's you're the one who's afraid of topics and afraid of debate and afraid of honest conversation. John, how did you feel about today's show?
Joe, it was illuminating, and this is from somebody who thinks he knows it all, and I was shocked and entertained and educated. I had some different insights on the mare cap, and Tinky, threw out a lot of statistics out there with sound judgment and just facts that made me kind of rethink a couple of things about supply and demand in the industry. We talked about the graded stakes situation, and you and I had talked about it in great detail about how it was just overblown and was there primarily for the breeders. But it was nice to hear somebody else again with fact-based conversations. I would say, Joe, that the thing that I learned the most out of these past couple of shows isn't even about Tink necessarily, but about people in general. And I really hope that if you're new to the show, you got an understanding of what we're trying to accomplish here. We don't think we're the smartest guys in the world. We don't even think we're the smartest guys in the room half the time. But we want to have open conversations about making the industry better. That's really what it's about. Joe takes it and looks at it from a wagering standpoint and from a breeding standpoint, which is phenomenal. I look at it from an owner's standpoint and also have the ability to add some information from some of the boards that I'm fortunate enough to be on. But overall, we just want to have open-ended conversations. And I really hope that, especially if you're new to the show, that you listen to what we're saying. We're not saying that we know everything. We're not saying that that we have all the answers. Basically, we just want to have open conversations. And, there are times when we seem a little slanted in our discussions. But for the most part, Joe, I would have to say that we're pretty even-handed with our conversations. We talk about the good and the bad of certain situations, the good and the bad of certain organizations and people in the industry. And I would really hope that you just don't prejudge our message, just because in the past, we may have been anti-blank. Doesn't mean that when new information and new facts come to light, that we're not reasonable and realistic enough people to say, you know what, that's a good point. So I hope that we continue to have these conversations, these open and frank conversations. And I'm just going to sit back and watch this show again because there was a lot of time where I was thinking about what you and Tink were saying and not really fully appreciating all of the nuances of the statements. And I'm really looking forward to watching this one, watching the next one, and hopefully for years to come. We're on show 30. I can't wait for show 300.
Totally. Well said. And for the record, we don't think Tinky knows everything either, and neither does he. That's not what this show is about. We're about anybody who's got a passionate voice about the business, founded in knowledge, and like I said, a real love and desire to see the game move forward and have a prosperous future. You are welcome anytime to come on the show and talk to us. Tinky just happened to take us up on it, and he happens to be a really smart guy too. So thanks to him for stopping by. Thanks to John Green, as always, my co-pilot, for all the smart questions and for joining us. Thanks to Patty Wolf, our producer, for setting all this up. Thanks to our associate producers, Anthony LaRocca, Aaliyah LaRocca, and Nathan Wilkinson. You guys are the best. Thank you to our sponsors, Fasig-Tipton, The Green Group, and TaylorMade. You guys are rock stars, and we could not do this without any of y'all either. So appreciate the continued support. And to the viewers and listeners, we appreciate you guys more than you know. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to the new people who tuned in for this week's episode. We hope you'll stick with us, and we'll see you real soon back here on Rail Talk.